I'm going back to my parents' house to give birth, so the parasite needs to leave the house.
It seemed that Monica's stay had been decided entirely by my mother-in-law, Margaret, without consulting anyone. However, since I work from home, our house is not set up to accommodate a pregnant woman. When I reached out to ask her to reconsider, I was told something unbelievable. You should leave. The shock left me completely frozen. What do you mean by leave?
With a stranger like you around, you'll just be in the way. I already sent my stuff to your place. It'll arrive tomorrow, so make sure you accept it.
The call ended abruptly, leaving only the empty sound of the dial tone ringing in my ears. But I'm the one paying the $3,300 rent. From the way she spoke, Monica clearly had no intention of being considerate and was going to barge in without respecting my wishes. If I don't muster the courage to change things now, I might be condemned to a life of being looked down upon and exploited forever. I'm not going to just let this happen. Alone, I vowed to take revenge on everyone who had ever treated me like this. My name is Emily Carter. I work from home while managing my responsibilities as a part-time homemaker. I've been married to Greg for 10 years. Although we've struggled to have children, I believe we've built a solid foundation of trust. Greg's father passed away a few years ago, and now his mother, Margaret, lives alone in their family home. Greg has an older sister, Monica, who got married last year and moved out of the house. Since we got married, Greg and I have been living in a rented apartment. Though it's a bit far from Greg's workplace, we've loved the quiet, pleasant neighborhood. However, Margaret's sudden visit without an appointment forced me to make a decision about moving.
You know how old my house is, right? It's really falling apart everywhere. The folks from the city told me there's a risk it could collapse if an earthquake hits.
Margaret, who had shown up unexpectedly, said this while sipping the coffee I had served her. Indeed, Greg's family home is over 50 years old, with creaking sounds echoing through the hallways and severe mold problems in the plumbing areas. It's easy to understand why they would say there's a risk of it collapsing.
What? But that's nothing new. It's been like that for years. Why bring this up all of a sudden?
Greg asked, frowning. Being someone who dislikes trouble, he was clearly suspicious of what Margaret might say next.
Well, since your father passed away, it's been so lonely living alone. I was wondering if I could sell the houses and live with you too. Please, I'm begging you.
Margaret said, using the house's deteriorating condition and her loneliness as reasons to propose living with us.
You can't just drop this on us. Moving isn't something we can do overnight. And we don't even have room for you in this house.
That's why I'm asking you to move out of here too and find a new home where we can all live together.
You say that like it's easy, but moving takes time and money.
Greg protested, both of us flustered by her urgency.
Oh, I'm not saying it has to happen right away.
Margaret replied, speaking as though she had the final say. She placed her coffee cup back on the table and smiled sweetly.
In 6 months, this apartment's lease renewal is coming up, isn't it? The location is great, but it's a bit far from Greg's workplace. This is the perfect chance to find a place closer to his office.
Well, that's true, but
It's not such a bad idea for you too, is it? I'll be waiting for a good answer. Well, see you soon.
Margaret said, leaving us both bewildered as she left.
sorry about Mom showing up like that, Emily. It must have caught you off guard.
Greg apologized to me with a guilty look after Margaret left. Yes, but I understand that she must feel uneasy living alone. About the idea of living together. What if we consider it more positively?
You don't really want to live with your mother-in-law, do you? You don't have to force yourself.
Oh, she's your mom, after all. I've always been prepared for this possibility if it ever came to it. While I wasn't completely free of concerns about living with Margaret, I'd always thought that, sooner or later, it would fall on us, as a childless couple, to take care of her. Plus, the benefit of making Greg's commute easier was appealing.
Emily, thank you. But this is important. So let's take our time and consider it carefully.
Even after that, Margaret visited us several more times, persistently proposing the idea of living together. Eventually, we gave in and agreed to move in with her. When we consulted a real estate agent to look for a new home, we quickly found a property with excellent conditions, and everything progressed smoothly. Margaret, however, said she could only afford the costs for demolishing her old house, leaving us to cover all the expenses for moving into the new home. The new house was conveniently located for commuting and offered an ideal living environment. While the monthly rent was quite high, the home was newly built and beautifully maintained, so we were satisfied. Best of all, the extra rooms compared to our previous apartment allowed me to finally have a personal office. Recently, work requests had been increasing, so I was delighted to create a space where I could fully focus on my tasks. Though I couldn't completely shake off my worries about living with Margaret, I was determined to endure any challenges for Greg's mother's sake. However, Margaret turned out to be far more difficult than I had expected. Margaret's flaws, which were not apparent when we lived apart, began to reveal themselves. They quickly came to the surface as soon as we started living together. When we discussed the terms of living together, it was decided that Greg and I would cover the rent, and in return, Margaret would handle the household chores while living with us. However, that arrangement only lasted for the first few months. Eventually, Margaret not only stopped sharing the chores, but also pushed all of the household responsibilities onto me. And whenever something didn't please her, she would make snide remarks. It had been less than 6 months since we started living together, and I was already exhausted by Margaret's behavior.
Stop trying to rely on me and do things properly yourself. You're so irresponsible.
I'm really busy with work and struggling to keep up. If you could help out a little, I'd really appreciate it.
Your so-called work can't be anything important, can it? And why should I be doing chores when there's already a daughter-in-law in the house?
When I gently suggested dividing up the chores, my proposal was flatly rejected.
Instead of focusing so much on work, why don't you start acting like a proper daughter-in-law? Honestly, you're so arrogant. I can't imagine why Greg married someone like you.
Margaret let out a deliberate sigh as she said this. She clearly looked down on my work, dismissing it as insignificant. For someone with Margaret's outdated mindset, it's likely that seeing me in my home office, working alone on a computer, didn't seem like real work. But in my own way, I've been giving it my all and taking full responsibility for what I do. I've tried explaining the nature of my work to Margaret before, but it seems she has a hard time understanding it. Even so, her comments were truly cruel. Margaret acts normal when Greg is around, but when it's just the two of us, she treats me harshly. Since Greg comes home late, he has no way of knowing that Margaret is offloading all the household chores onto me. Of course, I could bring it up to him, but I feel he wouldn't take it well to hear complaints about his mother, so I've been enduring it on my own. Looking back, it seems Margaret never thought highly of me, even from the start of our marriage. I'm 2 years older than Greg, and I once overheard her complaining that Greg should have married someone younger if he was going to get married.
A wife who's older sounds nice in theory, but she's just past her prime. That's probably why they haven't been able to have kids yet. The thought of them never having any is horrifying.
Her complaints were directed at Monica, Greg's sister.
If that happens, just make them divorce. A woman who can't bear an heir is a failure as a wife.
At the time, Monica was still single and living at the family home. Later, she got married and moved out, but it was clear that I wouldn't get along well with either Margaret or Monica.
Monica wants to come here to give birth. Of course, you're okay with that, right?
One day, Margaret blindsided me with this unexpected statement. I knew Monica was pregnant, but apparently, she wanted to stay at our house and have her baby here.
You might not understand, but it's her first time giving birth, and she's feeling nervous. I want to be there for her, so I told her to come here.
You can't just decide something like that without consulting me. I work from home, and if Monica suddenly comes here, it'll cause a lot of problems.
Why? What's wrong with inviting my own daughter to stay at the house? You're acting like my daughter is a nuisance, and it's not like your job is anything important.
Margaret, who had unilaterally decided that Monica would stay, showed no sign of remorse. Instead, she seemed annoyed, as if offended by my attempt to speak up. Realizing that talking to Margaret was going nowhere, I decided to contact Monica directly. When I called her, an irritated voice answered, "What do you want?" I heard from Margaret that you're planning to have your baby here. Is that true?
Yes, it is. Is there a problem with that?
We also need time to prepare for this. You need to discuss it not just with Margaret, but with me as well.
Why on earth would I need your permission? That's still my family home, and Mom's there anyway.
Just like Margaret, Monica had already decided that her stay was a done deal. Even so, I live here too, and ignoring me isn't okay. It was bad enough that I was already taking on all the household chores. Having an additional person in the house would undoubtedly affect me, and there was no way I could remain unaffected. The thought of not being able to focus on my work was, to be honest, frustrating. However, Monica said something far beyond anything I could have imagined.
No matter what you say, I'm going back to my parents' house to give birth, so the parasite can just leave the house. Problem solved, right?
Her outrageous statement left me frozen in disbelief. Leave? What do you mean by that?
Exactly what I said. I want to relax there for about 2 months after giving birth, and having a stranger like you around would just get in the way. It'd be impossible to feel at ease.
In the way? This is my house.
Oh, stop acting all high and mighty. No matter how much you complain, it's already decided. I'll be there the day after tomorrow, so get ready for it, okay?
The original family home had already been demolished. Still, even with Margaret living here, calling this house her parents' home felt completely wrong to me. If our relationship had been good, it might have been a different story, but I had no intention of letting such a spiteful woman into my home. Especially not for an extended stay. That's why you can't just decide this on your own. This is not your parents' home.
So persistent. Don't you realize I'm pregnant? If your refusal stresses me out and something happens to the baby, how are you going to take responsibility? Oh, wait, you wouldn't understand. You're defective and can't even have kids, right?
Her mocking tone made my blood boil. It was true that Greg and I didn't have children. We had both undergone extensive testing, but the cause of our infertility remained unknown. After struggling with the issue for a long time, we ultimately decided to give up on having children and live our lives together as a couple. However, even now, seeing children still brings a slight pang of sadness. That's precisely why I couldn't wholeheartedly agree to Monica, a pregnant woman, staying in our home. However, if Margaret or Monica had at least said a simple "please" to me beforehand, I would have begrudgingly agreed. However, instead of seeking my approval, Monica outright told me to leave the house. I was left stunned by her unbelievable arrogance and audacity.
I've already sent my stuff over. It'll arrive tomorrow, so make sure to accept it. Oh, and of course you'll handle unpacking too. You can leave after that's all done.
Wait. You can't just spring this on me.
Well, thanks in advance.
With that, she hung up abruptly, leaving only the hollow sound of the dial tone echoing in my ears. I'm the one paying the $3,300 rent. From the way she spoke, it was clear Monica had no intention of being considerate and planned to barge in, completely disregarding my feelings. She said the luggage is arriving tomorrow. She probably thought that as long as she sent her belongings, I wouldn't be able to refuse. Up until now, I had endured everything they said, believing I couldn't outright reject Greg's family. But if I didn't summon the courage to stand up for myself now, I might be stuck in a life where I'm constantly looked down upon and exploited. The thought of letting Margaret and Monica have their way filled me with frustration and regret. I'm not going to just let them walk all over me. I silently vowed revenge against those who had belittled me all this time. The next afternoon, a massive amount of Monica's belongings were delivered to our home. There was so much that even if I gave up my room, the place would still be overflowing with her things. As expected, there was no trace of consideration for us. She clearly intended to stay on her terms alone. No matter what Monica or Margaret said, this was my home. I couldn't allow such blatant tyranny, which felt more like an invasion, to go unchecked. Did she just tell me to leave my own home? Absolutely not. I'll make sure she learns her lesson. I pulled out my phone and made a call to a certain place. Yes, every single one, please. As soon as possible. The conversation went smoothly, and they assured me someone would come by tomorrow to handle everything. I can't wait to see the look on their faces. I muttered, smirking as I glanced at the mountain of Monica's luggage piled high in the corner. Then, around noon the next day, Monica barged into the house without even ringing the doorbell.
Oh, you're still here? I told you to leave already. You're such a useless slug.
Hurry up and pack your stuff.
As soon as they saw me, the two began hurling insults. However, ignoring the glares of the two, I continued to elegantly and leisurely sip my coffee. Seeing this, both Margaret and Monica looked visibly irritated, their eyes narrowing as they screamed hysterically.
Hey, are you even listening? What's with this leisurely coffee drinking? Answer us.
And what exactly have you come here for? This is my house. I replied, keeping my voice as calm as possible. Yes, this was undoubtedly my home. Even if they were family by marriage, I had no reason to tolerate their outrageous behavior.
You're still saying that? You parasite. I told you to get out of here. You're nothing but a stranger.
As Monica shouted, Margaret stood behind her, smirking smugly. She seemed to be thoroughly enjoying the situation.
That's right. Leave immediately. This house was rented by my son, not you. Know your place as a daughter-in-law and do as you're told.
I've been letting you stay here out of kindness, but it seems you don't understand your place.
My place? What are you talking about? Say it clearly.
You don't need to shout. You'll understand soon enough. The work is nearly done, I replied calmly. At my words, both Margaret and Monica froze, their faces showing confusion.
Work? What are you even talking about?
Excuse me, we finished loading everything. Could you come and confirm?
The front door suddenly opened, and a young man in work clothes appeared. Seeing the unfamiliar man, Margaret and Monica tilted their heads in puzzlement.
Who is this?
He's from a recycling shop. It's so convenient these days. They'll take unwanted items with just a single call.
Oh, I see. You finally decided to get rid of your belongings before leaving the house. Good for you.
Of course not. What are you even talking about? If your delusions are this bad, I'm afraid there's no saving you. Normally, I would stay silent no matter how many snide or sarcastic remarks they threw at me, but today, I had decided to speak my mind honestly, without fear.
You've got a lot of nerve talking like that. You're acting like a completely different person. It's disgusting.
A daughter-in-law daring to defy us. Who do you think you are?
My sharp rebuttals seemed to leave even Margaret and Monica bewildered, clearly unsure of how to respond. Ignoring the two of them, I continued my conversation with the worker. I joked with him, remarking how exhausting it must have been to load such a large amount onto the truck.
By the way, there were still some fairly new items in there. Are you sure it's okay to let us take them?
Yes, absolutely. Everything was unnecessary junk in this house.
Got it. Well, for newer items, we can resell them and turn a profit, so it's appreciated. Oh, here's the assessment amount. Could you check it for me?
He handed me a detailed invoice with the total value. It was roughly the equivalent of a single lunch outing. It wasn't a significant amount of money, but it was about what I had expected. Yes, everything looks good. Please take care of the rest.
Got it. Thank you very much.
The man replied cheerfully before leaving. The two of them, watching our exchange, stood there dumbfounded, their mouths slightly agape in astonishment. What's wrong? Why do you both look so clueless?
That man. Who was he? What did you just do?
What? I sold some unwanted items, of course. Look. I replied with a sweet smile, holding up the invoice from earlier. Oh, but it seems the appraisal wasn't very high. Everything ended up being practically worthless. Your stuff, Monica.
What? You had my belongings taken away. To a recycling shop.
Exactly. Everything that was delivered yesterday was picked up by the shop. After all, we don't have the space to store so many things here. The call I made yesterday? It had been to the nearest recycling shop. The recycling shop, which also offered home pickup services, came to our house the very next day and took away all of Monica's belongings that had been piled up at the entrance. I had considered throwing everything out as trash, but the boxes were filled with a chaotic mix of items, and sorting through them would have been a hassle. However, the recycling shop I contacted offered to take the boxes as is and appraise their contents, so I decided to go with that option. Above all, I simply wanted those obstructive belongings cleared out as quickly as possible, and their service was a lifesaver. Thanks to them, the entrance was now clean and organized, and I felt a refreshing sense of relief. In stark contrast to my calm satisfaction, Margaret and Monica were livid, their faces flushed red with fury as they shouted, "Unbelievable."
Why would you do something so outrageous?
Oh my, but wasn't it Monica who told me to unpack everything? Since it was all unnecessary junk, I took care of it for you. At my words, Monica began trembling with anger.
Are you insane?
If anyone's acting insane, it's you, Monica, trying to crash at someone else's house uninvited.
I'm the daughter of this house. What's wrong with coming back to my parents' home?
Clearly frustrated, Monica stomped her feet on the spot like a child throwing a tantrum. It was obvious that Monica couldn't stand the fact that her usually quiet and submissive sister-in-law was now talking back to her. You keep calling this your parents' home, Monica, but this is my house.
What? Your house? Greg is the one paying the rent, isn't he?
Margaret chimed in, clearly just as confused. It seemed the two of them had completely misunderstood, believing that Greg was the one covering the rent. As I've said multiple times, this is my house. The lease is under my name.
What?
Margaret let out a high-pitched, startled cry, her face resembling that of a pigeon caught off guard by a slingshot. I haven't mentioned this before, but I'm the one who pays the monthly rent here. When I revealed this truth I had kept to myself, the two of them burst into laughter.
Don't make desperate lies. You're paying the rent. There's no way that's true.
And now you're even claiming it's under your name. What a liar.
Well, why don't you ask Greg then? Hey, Greg, explain it to them. When I said that, Greg sluggishly emerged from the room adjacent to the living room. His complexion looked poor, and his steps were heavy. Just before the two of them arrived, I had been having a discussion with Greg. I had told him Monica is coming soon, so please stay around to explain things.
It's true. This apartment is in Emily's name.
You don't have to lie too, Greg.
I'm not lying. Do you think I could afford to keep paying the rent here on my salary?
This apartment was located in a very convenient area, which made the rent quite high. What Margaret didn't know was that I had a significant amount of savings. Before getting married, I had worked as a corporate employee and used my severance pay to start investing. At first, it didn't go well, but as I gained experience, I eventually began earning substantial profits. Based on this experience, I started a blog sharing my knowledge about investing. Because I had started as a simple housewife and achieved success in investing, my blog gained support from other housewives interested in the subject. Eventually, the blog caught the attention of a major publisher, who offered me the chance to turn it into a book. The book I published became a bestseller in the business category. Even though my investment earnings were enough to live comfortably, the additional income from book sales turned into almost passive income. As a result, I was covering all of our living expenses and rent.
Why did you keep such an important thing a secret until now?
Because of your attitude, Margaret. I can't trust someone who constantly mocks and belittles me every single day.
That's unfair. If I had known, I would have treated you differently.
Oh, so you base your attitude on whether someone has money or not? How does that reflect on you as a person? My rebuttal left Margaret speechless. Without the resources you've mocked me for having, there's no way we could rent such a nice apartment in this location. The rent here is $3,300. A luxury far beyond the means of most average workers.
Even if this is technically your house's, with Mom here, it still feels like my family's home.
Oh, don't worry. Margaret will be leaving soon. By your logic, that means this won't be your family home anymore.
You heartless woman. You're kicking family out of the house? Unbelievable.
You have some nerve saying that after trying to kick me out first. It was because of my hard work that I was able to rent this house. Even if they didn't know that, there's no reason to be kind to people who, family or not, can't show any respect. And Greg, you can leave too. It seems like I wasn't an important part of your family either. Why don't you go live somewhere else with your mom and enjoy each other's company? Hearing this, Greg immediately panicked.
Wait. I'll change. I promise I'll do better. Please don't do this.
He knew that if I left him, he'd lose the house. Understanding this, Greg desperately bowed his head to me, pleading with tears in his eyes for forgiveness. But watching him like this, I only felt exasperation. There wasn't a trace of pity in me. There's no way I'm forgiving you. I have no use for a husband who pretended to work overtime while cheating with a younger woman. Go ahead and live wherever you want with your beloved mother. Recently, Greg had been spending more time away from home, claiming it was due to overtime or business trips, and I had begun to secretly suspect him. When I hired a private investigator to look into his behavior, the evidence was undeniable. Greg was unquestionably guilty. In truth, I never wanted to live with Margaret. Still, I endured it and moved into this apartment, putting up with Margaret's constant snide remarks, all for Greg's sake. But while I was suffering under all this stress, Greg had been sneaking around and cheating. When I found out, I confronted him immediately with the evidence in hand. The photos and report from the investigator were irrefutable proof. Realizing he couldn't talk his way out of it, Greg admitted to the affair in full.
It was just a moment of weakness. Please forgive me.
Greg bowed his head so low it seemed like it might fall off, desperately begging for my forgiveness. When I had confided in Greg about Margaret's constant bullying, he brushed it off, saying I was overthinking it, and offered no help at all. I had already grown completely fed up with his passive, indifferent attitude. I considered kicking Margaret out along with Greg altogether. Just as I was contemplating this, the topic of Monica's return to stay during her pregnancy came up. Since I was already planning to divorce Greg, I decided I might as well make one last move to strike back. With that in mind, I disposed of all Monica's belongings and successfully inflicted the damage I had intended on both Monica and Margaret.
Mom, Monica, both of you need to apologize to Emily right now.
No way. Why should I have to apologize to a vile woman like her?
Exactly. Acting all high and mighty just because she's a nouveau rich.
Clearly, both Margaret and Monica were too prideful to even consider apologizing to me. That's perfectly fine with me. Even if they did apologize, I have no intention of forgiving them. You don't need to apologize. Just hurry up and leave. Otherwise, I'll have the recycling shop pick up Margaret and Greg's belongings next. Hearing this, all three of them stared at me, mouths agape and eyes wide with shock. Margaret and Greg had no choice but to comply with my demands, knowing they couldn't afford to have their belongings taken away as well. Their faces turned pale as the reality sank in. If you don't hurry, I'll call the police and report you for trespassing. When I said this, the three of them slumped in defeat, realizing they had no other options. Oh, Greg, wait a second. As the three of them were reluctantly leaving the house, I called out to Greg. Greg turned back with a hopeful expression, thinking he might be forgiven, but I handed him a piece of paper. Take this with you. My part is already filled out. It was a signed divorce agreement. Holding the document, Greg looked as if he was about to cry. At last, the house returned to peace and quiet. No more Monica with her audacious demands, no more Margaret looking down on me, and no more Greg, the unfaithful husband who cheated behind my back. From now on, I vowed to live life on my own terms, without holding back or enduring unnecessary struggles. Afterward, my divorce from Greg was finalized, and I was able to completely sever ties with his toxic family. Of course, I demanded compensation from both Greg and his mistress, and they agreed to pay. Greg's affair partner was apparently nothing more than a fling. However, since she knowingly got involved with a married man, I felt she deserved the appropriate punishment and didn't hold back in delivering it. The amount I demanded from Greg was set higher than the typical rate. I wanted to at least make him reflect on what he had done. As a result, Greg lost nearly all of his savings. Monica had planned to stay in the area for a while after giving birth, but since I kicked her out of the house, she had no choice but to return to her own home. Monica had planned to give birth at a high-end hospital near my home, one favored by the wealthy and equipped with spa services, but she was forced to transfer to a different facility. When Monica returned home complaining, she discovered that her husband had apparently brought another woman into their house. Furious, Monica immediately filed for divorce and attempted to demand compensation from both her husband and his affair partner. However, both of them quickly disappeared without a trace. Shortly after giving birth, Monica, now holding a small baby in her arms, found it difficult to track down her ex-husband and his affair partner. In the end, she was forced to give up and accept the situation in tears. Afterward, Margaret and Monica ended up living together in a small, old apartment. Monica has left her child in Margaret's care while working night shifts, but her baby is reportedly very sensitive and difficult to care for, with frequent and intense crying during the night. As a result, Margaret has been unable to get sufficient sleep and has reportedly fallen into a state of neurosis. I once saw Margaret and Monica from a distance in town. Margaret's hair was completely white, likely from stress, and Monica had a vacant, exhausted look in her eyes, seemingly worn out from fatigue. Their appearance, far from looking happy, told a story of struggle, and I quietly walked away from the scene. Greg, with his passive nature and aversion to trouble, apparently didn't lift a finger to help the two of them. Instead, he moved to a new home without even giving them his address. After our divorce, Greg seemed to calm down with his womanizing, likely due to his lack of money. However, his inherent penchant for women didn't change, and before long, he started pursuing a young female employee in his department. However, it turned out that the young woman was the daughter of an executive director who was about to get married. Greg's actions enraged her father, and he was promptly fired. Suddenly unemployed and with his savings depleted, Greg quickly found himself unable to pay the rent for the new home he had just secured. Desperate, Greg tried to return to live with Margaret and Monica, but fueled by resentment over being abandoned by him, they reportedly turned him away at the door. Rejected by his own family and with nowhere else to go, Greg was reportedly forced to live a near-homeless existence. It's a fitting end for such a heartless man. On the other hand, I moved out of that apartment and purchased a new home. The new place is spacious enough for me to live comfortably alone and is decorated entirely to my taste, creating a space I absolutely love. Of course, I made sure to include a home office in this house as well. This time, it's even larger than the previous one, which I'm very pleased with. When I lived with Margaret and Monica, the oppressive atmosphere made it hard to breathe, but now that everything is over, I'm enjoying a peaceful and carefree life on my own. Perhaps because I have no financial worries, living alone doesn't feel bad at all. In the past, I rarely left the house since I knew Margaret would complain if I did. But now, I can enjoy my favorite hobby, traveling, without having to consider anyone else. The days of being mistreated by Margaret and Monica and betrayed by my husband were painful, but it's precisely because I decided to stand up and fight back that I now have this happy and fulfilling life.